Welcome to today's verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. Wow, do we have a big show for you today. Starting out with the migrant crisis and how it's affecting New York City. Don't we have an obligation to make sure that people are housed and not on the streets? We'll talk to you about that. Next up, legal expenditures in the New York City Housing Authority. What are they spending your money on, and what may they be spending your money on in terms of outside counsel in defending types of lawsuits that they have against them? And finally, the Sweet Truth Act. Do you have an addiction to sugar? Well, you better watch out. It's not good for you, but don't worry. There's a new bill that's coming out. It's going to be on your menus, possibly, sugar content. Stay with us. Today's verdict has so much more, starting right now. Okay, welcome back to today's verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. We have Kathryn Kliff here from the Legal Aid Society, and we love having the Legal Aid Society on. Kathryn, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Well. So I guess the people who are not doing particularly well right now are those who are being affected by the migrant crisis. Maybe you could talk to the viewers a little bit about what's been going on and give us a little bit of an update, whether it's national or just local with respect to the migrant crisis, if you could.
Sure. So, New York City, we're the only jurisdiction in the country with a right to shelter that is a result of consent decrees that were brought on behalf of different populations. So we have a consent decree for single adults and a consent decree for families with children. And what we started noticing, the city started noticing in May, an uptick in the census, and specifically an uptick in the number of people coming to seek shelter who were recent migrants from other countries. And so at Legal Aid, we expected to see kind of a surge, at least in the families with kids shelter system this summer, because the eviction moratorium expired, early this year. Evictions have been increasing every month. Plus, we have had just historically a surge in the family system during the summer because it's easier to go into shelter with your kids when there's no school in session. So we expected to see a surge this summer, but then what was happening and was not relayed to us until July was that there was actually, in addition to those factors, there's an increasing number of recent migrant families coming to New York City. We found out once the city reported that we found out from a reporter first, and then the city reported that they had failed to place a number of families who had sought shelter. They just ran out of placements, which is in violation of their legal obligation. We had actually reached out to them prior to that to say, hey, the vacancy rate in the family with kids system is really low. What is your plan? They said, oh, we'll get you a plan. And then, we had no plan. And then suddenly the crisis kind of hit and families did not get placement. And so I started doing a lot of outreach at the intake site, speaking to families and meeting quite a few migrant families, also meeting many New Yorker families, but many migrant families as well coming into the system. And then more recently, Governor Abbott decided to bus people directly to New York City. All of the families I had met previously, they had come with the help of churches or friends, or they paid their own way to get here. But now Governor Abbott is actually sending buses directly to New York City.
Has the right to shelter law been violated in the past, where we just can't provide the housing that's needed? Is this a new phenomenon?
It's happened, but it's extremely rare, at least in the last decade. So the last time that they were not able to place all of the families in compliance with local law happened in 2014, and it was just one night. And the city notified us immediately, and we didn't see it happen again. For single adults, the last time that we had a violation was back in 2009, and we did actually have to go back to court to ensure compliance and to make sure the city was actually placing people in beds.
So when you go back to court, what does the judge say? What do they say? Find hotels, find something else? What do they do?
Exactly. So, in 2014, because the city immediately fixed the problem, we had no basis to go back to court. It was not an ongoing violation. Courts are not interested in a one-time violation. They're only going to get involved if it looks like it's going to continue. And so in 2009, that was the situation, as it was continuing. And so we did go to court and said you aren't providing beds, or you're just busing people around in the middle of the night, not giving them permanent beds. So the judge did order them, like, you have to provide the beds, and you can't do this this overnight busing and moving people from place to place. They need an actual Callahan compliant bed. Callahan is the right to shelter for homeless men case.
So what would you say is the biggest issue that's creating the homeless problem right now? Is it the migrant families? Is it the fact that we're just overloaded to begin with in terms of the shelter system? Because I see it on the Upper East Side. So if they're not going into the shelters and they're not going into the different hotels or wherever they are, they're on the streets. And it's clear, maybe it's not San Francisco yet, but it's clear that New York it's homeless or growing. What would you say is the cause of this?
So we've had mass homelessness in New York City for decades. Mass homelessness is not the result of recent migrants. The recent migrants coming in have certainly impacted the census and increased the census, but we're not even at the highest point the census has ever been. We're still well below that. So while it is increasing at a very rapid pace that we may not have seen before, we're still actually under. I think the highest number census got was around.
This doesn't feel. I'm just saying, it just doesn't feel that way. I don't know what maybe it's just. We're coming out of COVID and everyone's looking around and they're seeing things they're not used to. And maybe it was always there, but it just doesn't feel that way. It feels like there's the homeless are growing on the streets, and we want to help them. There's a mental health crisis in the city also. It's just the thoughts are that there's more to it, but you could be right. I want to shift gears for a second and talk about nationally. There's may very well be a lawsuit that started or has already been started against the different governors of the country with respect to duping migrants on the border into signing away their rights and allowing them to leave Texas by plane or bus. What are your thoughts on that?
So there was, a situation where Governor DeSantis apparently, I have no special expertise in this. Obviously, this is just from, reporting and the complaints that have been filed, but apparently went to Texas and had people recruit on his behalf to go on a plane, and it led them to believe they were going somewhere that was not where they actually ended up, used McDonald's gift cards to entice them, promised that they would get all these services, and then brought them to Martha's Vineyard, which was not expecting them, and chartered them on private planes, which I imagine was quite costly, and left people in a situation that they had no idea they were getting into, is not what they wanted and not where they wanted to be. I will say that the families I meet when I do outreach, they do want to be in New York City. There certainly have been cases on the Abbott buses where people get off the bus and say, this is not where I wanted to be. And the city has helped, or the nonprofits have helped them get where they want to be. But the families that do end up usually at the intake sites, they want to be in New York. They want a job. They want to work. They, experience some significant trauma in their home country, and they came here thinking this would be a better way of life. In the Texas case the case against DeSantis, the issue is that people did not want to be there, and they were, it appears that they were told things that were not true in order to get them to get on that plane.
So where are we heading with the migrant crisis? This is a bell curve. What are your thoughts? We don't have too much time left, but where are we going with this? Are we making inroads in terms of providing the shelter that's needed? What are your thoughts?
Well, the city has, maintained their commitment to the right to shelter. There were some statements made by the mayor that made us nervous that he was not going to abide by the legal obligations, or felt that the right to shelter was not something New York City was going to continue to support. And, this is a result of litigation. You can't just no longer have a right. The reason it's a right is because it's a hard thing and people really need shelter. And in order to have New York City not look like West Coast cities with massive encampments and people sleeping in cars and other really unsafe places, that is why we have the right to shelter. It is extremely dangerous for people to be out on the streets, especially in the colder winter months. The right to shelter for single men, during that time that case was brought, many people were dying from hypothermia for being out on the street. So that is not a place we want to go back to from either a moral perspective or from a legal perspective. And so it's really, the city has maintained that commitment, and they are now dialoguing with us and letting us know, we've asked for a plan. They are starting to make those plans. It's just difficult because they are receiving anywhere between 400 and 500 people a day now coming on these buses, and it's hard. It's certainly a difficult situation, but we appreciate that they've maintained their commitment to shelter people as they're legally obligated to do, but also recognizing the needs of these recent migrants are very different than maybe the New Yorkers that typically come into shelter.
All right, well, Kathryn Kliff with the Legal Aid Society Homeless Rights Project. We want to thank you very much for being on. Hopefully you come on next couple of months to give us an update of what's going on with the migrant crisis.
So thank you so much.
It's our pleasure. All right, stay with us. Today's verdict has so much more right after this.
We built a media network for you.
BronxNet TV.
Come learn in your new state-of-the-art studios at Lehman College.
At Mercy College.
And coming soon to the South Bronx in the Hub.
Inspire with your stories, culture, history.
Your Bronx on BronxNet.
Engage with us.
Connect with us at your channels and at bronxnet.tv.
Learn, engage, inspire. BronxNet TV.
From the Bronx
to the world.
BronxNet.
All right, welcome back to today's verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. We have with us today Nick Smith, the first deputy public advocate, here to discuss the NYCHA legal expenditures bill. Nick, how you doing today?
Okay, how are you? Thanks for
good.
doing this.
Listen, it's our pleasure to have you guys on. Let's talk a little about legal expenditures. I'm on my co-op board. I understand when you start hiring outside attorneys to take care of the building, everybody starts getting in an uproar. It costs more money. Basically, the New York City Housing Authority is a pretty big board, and I guess they're looking for some more attorneys to do some of their work, but it's expensive.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
That's right. Well, this whole, let me just start with NYCHA overall. We know that there's been, 40 years of, frankly, disinvestment in public housing across the city of New York and really across the country. You think about Chicago, the public housing there and other places. So what that's led to with the NYCHA in New York City of, the 400,000 or some odd residents is a public housing network that is frankly embarrassing. It was the crown jewel at one time in this country, and it just the coin's been flipped. And so we actually did a tour of NYCHA in recent months, and I think 5 different developments, 1 per borough, just to see over those 40 years what has really been happening. And we're coming up on heat season very soon. And one example is we know we're going to see temporary boilers put up in developments across the city, which costs a bunch of money. Why? Because boilers across the system are frankly in disrepair. We saw, if you recall, David, the issue of lead a couple of years ago, where NYCHA was falsely certifying that there were no lead issues in people's apartments when that wasn't true. We've seen rats, rodents, we've seen mold in people's apartments. And so when we talk about legal expenditures, and I'm a lawyer as well, and I will tell you, I think, well, hey, I know that NYCHA has a general counsel and we have a law department for the city. Why do we need to hire outside attorneys? And that usually means it's tenant versus NYCHA or resident versus NYCHA. And if they've got to hire outside counsel, that means the stakes are much higher for the board, as you mentioned, and they're trying to, frankly, wiggle out of some real pickles, some problems. And I shouldn't be facetious. People are, their lives are really at stake because they're living in these units. One apartment I went to at Lincoln in Harlem, there was soot for the floor. There were no tiles and no carpet or nothing. There was little soot. And the resident was, I put in tickets many times and nothing's happened. So we want the public, as the public advocate's office, not only to put the money where it needs to be, get it from the Fed, to get it from the state, also improve the management, because it isn't just money, it's money and management, do the big things and small things. But also let us know, what are you spending on to defend against resident claims, for example, or claims relevant to those who live in these apartments? And why do you need to hire outside counsel? As I mentioned, a unit attorney, I know this, if you're hiring outside counsel, that means you got a really big problem, David.
Yeah, and it's billing too. You hire outside counsel, it's an hourly rate. Who knows what they're charging? It's not in-house. Listen, whether it's bed bugs, mold, asbestos, lead, these are claims. I understand that. But if you get outside counsel, and I've had outside counsel on trials whenever I bring actions against this housing authority, I know what they're charging. I know how much it costs when they go to trial. Thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars. So, where is the money going? Who's putting the cap on the law firms? Who's running the show and making sure that the litigation is being reviewed and there's not this overbilling over and over and over again? It's a great point. And yes, I know NYCHA is overrun. I understand that they're in disrepair. There are going to be lawsuits, but it doesn't mean you throw it out on legal counsel. That's going to, they're going to overbill. It always happens.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And quite frankly, if I were in the private sector as a practicing attorney, I would build the city a crap load too, because think about what you have to defend. The conditions in NYCHA are deplorable. And so, yeah, I'm going to overcharge you. But then as a city, as a public authority, we shouldn't be accepting that. And that's exactly why we want to know, what firms, as you mentioned, David, what firms are you contracting with and why and how much? And
well, are they going to give it out to bid it? Are they going to bid it out to different law firms? I mean, how are they going to find the right firm, the right suit, the right fit? I mean, there are some, law firms that are very good at defending these types of claims. And then there are some law firms that just have a good relationship with NYCHA, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they know how to defend the claims, right? You got to find the right law firm, don't you think?
Absolutely. Attorney quality is a real thing. And so to me, the whole situation is problematic. And this bill is but one in a larger toolkit in our toolbox to figure out not just what they're spending on attorneys, but how can we move NYCHA overall towards a real reform that requires federal reinvestment, state reinvestment, city reinvestment, and shift in the management process.
What's your overall thoughts on NYCHA lately? I know they've been taking a lot of heat in the press for everything from arsenic in the water to so many other things. They're always that that kid who's always getting the brunt of the yelling by the parent. They just can't catch a break. What are your thoughts on the New York City Housing Authority? They used to be the crown jewel. I understand.
Well, to prove your point, every year the public advocate does what's called the worst landlord watch list, where we go around the city and figure out who are the worst violators. And we know there's different metrics with the NYCHA versus a private landlord. But even with those different metrics, NYCHA is by far the worst landlord in the city in terms of just, frankly, almost everything. And so I don't take pride in castigating an authority, which in many ways, some of the problems are not in their per se control due to a lack of funding, but some of those problems are. And to give an example, in some of our tours around the city, we talk to many residents who, when it comes to smaller scale repairs, will put in tickets and either wouldn't hear back from a repair person, or would hear back and they would have a repair date for months or years after the fact, like replacing pipes or stoves, like a multi-month or year process, or again, wouldn't hear back. So again, it isn't just money; it's management. And so we've done a couple of reports on NYCHA now, including the most recent one, showing the actual conditions. And so to more squarely answer your question, we've got to shift what happens with NYCHA and residents. And let's remember, we're talking about some of the most vulnerable residents of this city, 400,000 of them who are often low income and have other sort of social service needs. And so we are, frankly, as a city, and I guess as a state and federal government, abandoning the core promise, to your point, of the crown jewel of public housing. We've got to turn the page, and we've got to do this now. There's no more time to wait.
Is there a particular area, whether it's the South Bronx where my office is, or whether it's Queens where I grew up, is there an area that just seems to need more help than anywhere else?
That's an interesting question, David. I would say, based on what we saw, no. We get calls from all around the city. I live in Harlem, and when we did the tour of Lincoln, we saw the Lincoln houses. We saw the exact same or slightly related issues everywhere. Lack of heating, hot water, mold in people's bathrooms, pipes that have not been replaced in many years. The historic issue with lead. Broken locks. Staten Island, we went to Stapleton houses, and one resident started bursting in tears and telling us that her son had jumped off the roof of the building because the gate was unlocked, and I guess he was going through some mental health challenges, and he leapt off the building and committed suicide. So I can't say there's one area. I think it's system-wide.
A lot of work to be done. All right, Nick, we're gonna have to leave it there. We're running out of time. But again, our regards to the Public Advocate's Office. You guys do great work. And hopefully you come back next couple of months and tell us what's going on with the legal expenditure bill, if you could.
So do you, David, and we'll keep you updated on the progress of that bill and the whole system. Thank you
Wonderful.
so
All
much.
right, stay with us. Today's verdict has so much more right after this. Okay, welcome back to today's verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. We have Keith Powers, the council member of District 4 in New York City. Keith, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Nice to see you. Thanks for having me.
Keith, you have a sweet tooth like I do?
I do, but I've learned that it's better in moderation and then I have to keep an eye on it, like most New Yorkers, like most people. And that's why we want to give people more information about what they're eating every day.
And that's why we're going to be talking about the Sweet Truth Act. Am I correct?
That is right. The new bill from the city council.
All right, tell the viewers a little bit about it.
Sure. Our bill is pretty straightforward. When you walk into a fast food restaurant, moving forward, if this law goes into effect, when you go to order an item that has an excess of your daily amount of sugar, you're going to see a warning signal right next to it that's going to indicate how much sugar is in it, and it's going to tell you that you might be potentially putting yourself in harm or going at least exceeding the daily allotment of recommended sugar.
All right, let me stop you right there because this always gets a little tricky. Is it food chains? Is it your local diner? Who would this cover?
It's food chain, so it's any place that has 15 or more locations in the city. Okay. So those are going to be normally your fast food restaurants or any place that has a number of locations. We're not asking at this point for your local diner, your local deli, your small mom and pop. We recognize there are some challenges to keeping up with these regulations for small businesses, but for the chains, who also have the biggest appeal and the largest reach.
Let's make believe we're talking about an IHOP. Okay, everybody loves pancakes. There's probably more than 15 in the area.
There
right?
Probably are.
And there are a lot of chocolate chip pancakes. I love chocolate chip pancakes. So what's going to be on that menu?
So when you open that menu, if that item and only if that item is in excess of how much sugar we recommend for your daily intake, then it will have a warning sign next to that item indicating that you might potentially be eating more sugar than it's recommended. And by the way, not in that whole meal, in that one particular item.
All right, well, there's no question that the chocolate chip pancakes is going to be over the usual dietary limits for sugar. So where do you put this warning? Is it right under the item? Is it right to the left?
Yeah, it should be right next to the item, and it will give you a warning. And look, this is just in line with other things like the calorie count intake that we put on menus right now. Same thing, fast food chains only have that. I have gone into restaurants, I've seen items, I've said, oh my God, I did not realize that actually I thought was healthy actually has so many calories in it. Additives and things like that. So I normally might pivot and order something else. That's exactly what we're asking for here. Information is helpful. You make the decision. We're going to give you the better information to make that decision.
All right. Well, there's always pushback somewhere. Where's the pushback coming from? McDonald's? Where
Yes, we believe the fast food chains will disagree with this because obviously they have items that are packed with sugar. Look, we could, of course, the other folks have in the past tried to ban items like that. We're not doing that. We're saying you can make an informed decision, but there's so much hidden ingredients and added sugar in all these items that when you go in, you should be able to make that decision with the information that we're asking them.
Now, where is the impetus for this? Because I know this is a strange analogy, but when we had a seatbelt law that finally went into effect, one of the ways that we put this forth is that by not having it, we're increasing the number of casualties in the emergency rooms, and that is being forced or pushed on to the taxpayer who has to pay for the costs of all these injuries or accidents that if you had a seatbelt, this wouldn't have happened. Is that what's happening here? If you reduce your amount of sugar, there's less diabetes, there's less emergency room visits, and we're not paying for it as a society. Is that where this is coming from?
That's right. We are living in a world that has a lot of food items we eat every day. New Yorkers particularly are on the go. We're running into these places, we're ordering items. In a lot of cases, people on their way to work are getting that mocha frappuccino or whatever it is. They drink it every single day, and they don't realize just to the extent of how unhealthy it is. You multiply that over 365 days or 150 days, you enter a health crisis. And we here are seeing a health crisis that sometimes seems hidden to the public and to your ordinary New Yorker, but it is a health crisis about nutrition, a health crisis about obesity, and all the related diseases. We need to do something as a society to start tackling this. And what is the easiest and best first step is to tell you what's in it. And look, think about it this way. If you walk into a restaurant right now and you grab that bottle of soda, you know exactly how much is in it, and you can look right on the label and see what's in it. The fountain soda that's right next door to it,
you have no idea.
I have no idea. It's exactly the same thing. And so we're saying now you should know, and you can make a different decision. You might even know that this has more sugar than that, or the other way around, and make just a pivot. When you go back for that refill, now you know exactly what's in it, and you might make a different choice. And the other thing I'd say is, I've had probably the most common thing I've had people come up to me when I talk about this bill and say, iced tea. Everybody thinks iced tea is really healthy, and it is, until you throw all the sugar into it.
Right.
When you go to that fountain soda and you buy an iced tea, a lot of people think they're making a really healthy choice for themselves.
And and look, sugar is an addiction. I mean, if you try going without sugar for a couple of days and see the kind of headache you're going to get, it's not too different from caffeine. It's an addiction.
Totally. And how many of us are sitting on our couch in a night and I just have a craving for a snack or something like that? That's totally normal. It's totally fine. But we want you to find that balance. We want to know, we let you know throughout the day, what are you consuming? That way you will make smarter choices. Maybe you grab a fruit instead of a snack, a sugary snack. Maybe during the day you grab a water instead. I myself have taken out, I don't put sugar in my coffee anymore. I've really pivoted towards healthier beverages because I realize not only do we want to look good and feel, but we want to feel good and we want to be healthy. And so this is one way to do that.
Final thoughts. Where are we heading in terms of, we were trying to become a much more health conscious society in New York City. Do you see more of these bills coming down the line? I mean, we could, listen, we're not going to mandate people go to the gym. I get it. Yeah. But are there going to be other bills coming down that's going to really look at our health? And
I don't know of any others right now besides this bill, but I think what you're seeing is that between the calorie counts and the restaurant grades and the sodium warnings, that there is a belief here that you can provide people information and give them choices and give them better choices. We're not doing sort of the nanny state thing that people complain about, saying you can't do this. We're saying you sell permission, but let's do it now. The only thing I'd add is that while we might not see pieces of legislation today, the success of things like this have an impact, I think, on both the actual menu items that make it onto menus when people realize they have to offer healthier choices. We've seen that in restaurants, and we might see better efforts to inform people in the future.
Councilmember Keith Powers. Keith, thanks so much. Very informative. And stay away from the pixie sticks. I will. I don't know if you remember those. I do.
I do. I used to love them.
Stay with us. Today's verdict has so much more right after this. Well, that's all we have for today. I'd like to thank our guests for joining us, and of course, you, the viewers, for watching. If you have a topic or an issue that you'd like to see on a future edition of Today's Verdict, feel free to email me at davidlesch@bronxnet.org. Until the next time, know your issues, reach a verdict. See you in 2 weeks.